In this video, we'll educate you on the 3 most common investment accounts out there for kids. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a certified financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. It's not uncommon that as my clients are approaching retirement and they've secured their own mask, if you will, for their goals, they have an ancillary goal of passing on funds to the next generation and setting them up for success. In addition, your family might have some ancillary family members who want to pass on funds, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever, who want to provide financially for the next of kin. And so it's going to make sense to be aware of what's out there for how you can set up your family for success. Also, without getting into the nuances of estate planning, generally, if you're approaching certain limits, it's going to make sense to start distributing your estate before you pass away. That way you minimize the impact of estate taxes. Federally, the estate tax limit is $12.9 million for 2023, and that means anything above and beyond $12.9 million is going to be subject to somewhere in the ballpark of 18 to 40% in taxes. From a state estate tax limit, you might be in a state that does not have an estate tax limit. Here in Washington State, we do have one, and that limit is at $2.2 million. Anything above and beyond that, you're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 20% in taxes. I'll link below so you can see if your state is subject to an estate or an inheritance tax. And if it is, you're going to want to customize this message to that. But nonetheless, it's probably going to be in your best interest if you have a larger estate, or you're going to be based on projections, that you look at methods of distributing that estate before passing away. Outside of reducing estate tax limits, it also could totally make sense for the next generation to have some funds so that they can start understanding how the investment space works, or understand what it means to have investments, and ultimately learn some responsibility in that department, and you can customize the message there. In addition, if you've charged your kids with finding where they're going to go for some type of college education, it'd probably be helpful for them to know what expectations are as far as what the family can afford. So you might bring them in the loop as to maybe what provisions you've made for them so that they can accurately plan out their next steps. For example, I can remember back in the day applying for a number of colleges that were super excited to have me, only to then realize that I had nothing ready to go to pay for that college. So as any young male with a lot of energy but no money does, I joined the Army and I had them pay for it. I'm not saying you should necessarily do that strategy, but it is helpful to know from a budgeting standpoint when you're looking at colleges to know what can we afford. Okay, so agenda today, we're going to cover the most common accounts for kids, as well as some pros and cons. We'll probably need to break this up into a 2-parter video, but let's jump in. So the most common account I'm seeing out there today is the 529 plan. You can think of this account as an education-only account. There's some nuance we'll get into later, but nonetheless, for the most part, these 529 plans are earmarked for education purposes. Technically, they're called qualified tuition plans. 529 is just shorthand for the section of the Internal Revenue Code that refers to this type of plan. Now there's 2 types of 529 plans. There's prepaid tuition plans and then education savings plans. Prepaid tuition plans, they're not that common. It's essentially the ability for you to prepay for credits at a particular institution at today's dollars in anticipation for what they could grow into in the future as far as cost per unit. And these prepaid tuition credits may or may not transfer to the university that your kiddo actually decides to go to, so it could be kind of a crapshoot, or it could be the best investment you ever made. For those of you in Washington State, this is what the GET program was. I'm not really seeing these that much anymore. It's sort of a legacy product back in the day. I'm mostly seeing the other type of 529 account out there, which are education savings plans. Most of the time when someone says they have a 529, that's what they're referring to. In Washington State, this is the Dream Ahead 529. It's a lot more common because it has way more flexibility, and it's essentially the Roth IRA for education, whereby you fund this account for a beneficiary. The beneficiary is generally the name of the kiddo that you want to have funds provision for. You invest this money inside the 529 into, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, whatever. That money grows, and ideally grows into enough to afford a substantial chunk of whatever education costs are for when they go to some type of school. It's analogized to the Roth IRA of education because money goes into this account post-tax. The money grows inside the portfolio tax-free. And then if you decide to use these funds for education purposes, you can use the account completely tax-free. Now, you can only spend it on qualified higher education expenses. And those would be things like tuition, room and board, other fees associated with the school, books, computers, software, stuff like that. It can't be for food or for a car, things like that. Those aren't considered qualified higher education expenses. Similar to how we see pensions going away in favor of 401ks nowadays, it's putting more onus on the employees to save for their future. We're seeing the same thing with 529 plans, where the prepaid tuition plans are kind of getting phased out because it puts more onus on the college to make sure they're pricing everything perfectly. Because if there's a 10% inflation rate and they gave prepaid tuition purchasers a sweet deal, the college could be losing out on a ton of money in the future. It's basically less risk to the school if they make you save and invest for what you think that their rates are going to be 10 years from now. Which, with the massive cost of college education increasing over the past many years, it's paid off well for them to get rid of these prepaid tuition plans. One cool thing you can do with these education savings plans is actually front load them with 5 years of gifting contributions. So from an estate planning standpoint, there's an annual gift amount that each individual is allowed to gift any person that they want to. For 2023, that limit is $17,000, whereby I could give 17 grand to anybody I want to, and it would not impact my lifetime gift exemption. We'll jump into lifetime gift exemptions another time, but just know that there's no adverse estate planning consequence to gifting away the annual gift exemption amount every single year to whoever you want. The 529 is unique, whereby you can gift $17,000 times 5 years up front as one lump sum to the 529 plan, and it still will not adversely affect your lifetime gift exemption. So 17 grand a year times 5 years is 85 grand. You as the parent could gift your child's 529 account $85,000 in the first year as a lump sum. You then can't fund it for the next 4 years because you front loaded it, but as we know from an investment standpoint though, a larger sum of money invested up front means it has those 4 years to compound and grow. Whereas if you had to layer in $17,000 each year, the account mathematically wouldn't compound to the same amount 20 years from today. Now that annual gift limit is per donor per person. So theoretically, if there's 2 parents, both parents could gift 85 grand 5 year front loaded up front for a total of $170,000 into a 529 plan from day one. Now, there may be some reasons why you wouldn't do this, of course, but nonetheless, those are your limits. From a tax standpoint, some states actually offer a tax deduction to funding a 529 plan on your state income tax return. Not every state does this, and obviously the states that have no income tax are not going to do this. So check with your individual state. In addition, you might have to invest in that state's 529 plan. A lot of states have their own 529 plan, and theoretically you don't have to invest in, say, the Washington 529 plan in order to pay for a school in Virginia. But if you're going to try to achieve the tax benefits associated with funding a 529 plan, you might need to fund your state's 529 plan. Each state that has their own 529 plan has some investment custodian that they've partnered with to run the plan. For example, in Virginia, they use American funds, and you might say, I don't want to invest in American funds, I'd rather invest in like Fidelity. So you'd look at a different state that maybe has Fidelity as an investment custodian. Last thing from a tax standpoint, any unused 529 monies or money that's pulled out of the 529 to be spent on things other than qualified higher education expenses require income tax payments on the untaxed portion, as well as a 10% penalty tax on the untaxed portion of the 529 that you funded. With any 529 plan, there's going to be some level of basis, which is what you've put in, and then there's going to be some gain that makes up the difference to get to the total account value. Obviously, the basis is returned to you tax-free, no consequences, but above and beyond that, that growth, that's going to be subject to income taxes and a 10% penalty. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, awesome. Let's say I've saved a bunch of money into my 529 account, but my kiddo gets a full ride scholarship. There are rules to provide a safety hatch here where you can withdraw up to the dollar equivalent of that scholarship out of the 529 plan and avoid the 10% penalty. You will have to pay income taxes on the untaxed portion of that withdrawal, but you avoid the 10% tax penalty, and the whole time you got a tax deferral. Another type of education plan that we'll keep in this segment of the video is called a Coverdell, or an education savings account, also known as an ESA for short. Now, I hesitate to spend a lot of time on this because these are old products that really aren't super popular nowadays. Back in the day, 529 accounts were not permitted to pay for elementary school, like private elementary school type stuff. Whereas as of the Tax Cuts Jobs Act of 2017, we are allowed to now use 529 plans to fund private elementary school expenses. So back in the day, the only way to pay for a private elementary school was to use a Coverdell, education savings account. You're seeing these phase out because there's way more restrictions on how much you can put in, what you can distribute the funds for, and they're generally falling out of favor. So I can't remember the last time I ever set up a Coverdell. Really, the only thing we use Coverdells for is to roll them into 529 plans. You are permitted to roll a Coverdell into a 529 plan. So if you have a Coverdell from back in the day and you appreciate the flexibility that a 529 plan has to offer, you can roll a Coverdell into a 529 plan. And for the most part, I'm unaware of any downsides to doing that. I'm unaware of anything the Coverdell can do that the 529 plan can't. Regardless of what education account you set up for your kiddo, you as the custodian maintain control of this account. The beneficiary, or the kiddo in this example, is not the one who controls the education account. They don't control the investment selection. They don't get access to the account when they're 18, 19, 20, 21. Whereas these other types of accounts we'll talk about later, they do go to the ownership of the kiddo when they turn the age of majority in that state. So hopefully that was helpful in covering 529s. I'll push out another video next week on the other types of investment accounts that are out there for kiddos. So if you have further questions, drop them in the chat below, send me an email, we will get you squared away on 529s. And the only call to action here is to make sure you're educated on the pros and cons of 529 plans, because if parents or grandparents are trying to give you money for your kiddo, it makes sense to be aware of the pros and cons to funding a 529 plan. It's not necessarily the end all be all. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Have a good rest of the week. Bye.